to begin the first session. This is Beyond the SQE, Developing the Next Generation of Lawyers, and Marek Jackson, the Director of Business Development at the University of Law, is chairing the session. And delegates, please could you now set your chat to sessions, and this is just so that you don't miss any of the commentary. I'm going to hand over to you, Morette, to begin the session.
Okay, thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you. And hello, everyone. We're very, very excited to be here with our first plenary session of this conference following the introductory talk. So good morning. In just a minute, I'm going to introduce my panel for this first session of the day on Beyond the SQE. If I may, I just thought I'd take a minute to introduce myself for those who I haven't met before and just explain sort of rationale behind this first hour. So my name is Marek Jackson, as Aisha said. I am the Director of Business Development at the university, and although I'm a tutor and a solicitor by background, these days I just work exclusively really with legal employers, law firms, in-house teams, talking about their training needs and sort of strategic planning of training needs across the whole gamut. So from school leavers and paralegal apprentices right the way through to LPC, GDL, post-qual training. And we all know, though, I think, in the last, 2-3 years, that conversation of the whole horizon has been dominated by the SQE. Now, in the last year or 18 months or so, of course, completely unexpectedly, that discussion has been impacted by global events. So the SQEs perhaps took slightly more of a back burner, but it is now back on the agenda for discussion. But we've had a lot of conferences and events, such as this one in the past, talking about SQE-specific programs. What I wanted to do this morning was think about some of the other things that are out there on your to-do lists, talk about beyond the SQE. We've discussed its ins and outs and lots, but there's no doubt it is a huge opportunity for us to start thinking about doing things differently. And that, I think, coupled with the necessary pause and return to the office caused by the pandemic, means that I'm sure there are lots of ideas and new initiatives on everybody's planning for the future. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce my panel this morning, and I'm very grateful for you all to join me because I know how busy it is. First of all, I would like to introduce my colleague, in fact, Patrick Johnson, who is the Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Law. Hello, Patrick. We've done a few of these events together, and, you know, we've still not actually met in person, which is another impact of the pandemic. And then secondly, Maria Kell, who we're delighted to have join us from the BBC, where Maria is a professional support lawyer and the legal new talent manager at BBC Legal. So hi, Maria, talking about their experience of legal training and changes that they have made in their recruitment and early talent strategy. And then finally, my third guest this morning is Peter Arnold. Peter is the Early Talent Development Manager at CMS, a ULaw client, and we're absolutely delighted for him to join us and talk about what is a pretty mixed early talent pipeline. Is that right, Peter? It's quite wide and far encompassing. So we'll talk a little bit more about what his plan is for them, their return to the office, and their post-SQE strategy a little bit later on. So thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to start, if I may, by talking to Patrick, firstly because he is a relatively new joiner to the University of Law, but also because, of course, one of the other huge topics that everyone has been talking about in the past year is the importance of diversity and inclusion. Widening participation in the legal profession and the experience, I think, of different types of students and new joiners to the legal profession. So, hello, Patrick. Can I ask you just to introduce yourself to the audience and say a few words about your background and how you came to be in this role?
Okay, good morning and thanks, Morette. So, yes, I've been in role for nearly 4 months now. So I went to the office for the first time earlier this week, actually, and saw some people face to face, which is amazing. But in terms of my background, just to give you a bit of an insight, it's probably worthwhile talking about it in terms of decades, although I'm not that old. But certainly, my career started in the 90s, working as I trained as a careers advisor, and I worked in schools and colleges, and then became a manager and managed a team of advisors working across schools and colleges. Got really interested in that whole sort of employability space, and in the early 2000s moved into the sort of university sector. Worked a lot with graduate recruiters, and that sort of moved me within the space, I suppose, of looking at positive action and working quite a lot with graduate recruiters in terms of diversifying their workforce. So looking at things around internships, mentoring, and other things as well. The last sort of decade or so has been more focused on diversity and inclusion, where I've spent my time within the sort of higher education sector, leading diversity and inclusion at the University of Manchester, but also working across the sector actually at a national level with universities and other organisations, trying to push forward on diversity and inclusion.
Thank you. And so what was it about this role that first attracted you to it?
Yeah, I'd say that I was looking for a new challenge. I'd been at the University of Manchester for nearly 20 years, and I wanted to make a difference somewhere else. And I think it's probably fair to say that I think within the higher education sector, there was nothing that really attracted me or was appealing, being at Manchester. And I saw this opportunity at the University of Law, and it was something different, and something that really attracted me was actually how it positioned itself. And I think wanting this role was part of the executive board. And I think if you look across higher education, you won't find another role where it sits up on that top table in terms of that complete focus on diversity and inclusion. So that really attracted me to it, 'cause for me, it meant that ULaw was serious about diversity and inclusion. It wasn't just having someone in the corner and trying to tick a box in terms of showing that you're doing something in this space. It was being serious in terms of wanting to embed diversity and inclusion across the institution. So that was the key thing in terms of that challenge, trying to make a difference, and I think the positioning of the role.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, we're delighted to have you. So I wanted to ask you, obviously, quite a few questions about diversity and inclusion. And what I thought might be sensible was to start by thinking about your ambitions and your vision for the university before we then sort of move on to think about your reflections on what you're seeing about the sector as a whole and the experience of students as they join that profession. So if I could start with the university, what really is your vision for equality, diversity and inclusion at the University of Law, would you say?
Probably similar to most organisations, I would say. I mean, there's a key thing for me around representation, about support as well. And I think the key thing is probably about the environment that we work and study in at ULaw would be the key thing. So ensuring that it's the right environment for students and for staff to feel happy, safe, and that they belong within that environment, and it's somewhere where they want to be. So I think once you create that environment, I think it then opens up other things that we're talking about in terms of representation and other things as well. But certainly the key thing for me is creating that inclusive environment for staff and for students.
Okay, yeah. And I suppose I'm thinking, in fairness to the university, this is the first board level role we've had in equality, diversity, inclusion, but that's not to say that there was no evidence of good practice before you arrived. And I suppose been here 4 months now. Can you give us some thoughts on what you see around the university at the moment, aspects of best practice in the university?
Yeah, and that was great. So there was a concern coming in, and that it was a created role, and thinking that I'd have to start from scratch, and that absolutely isn't the case. I think there's lots of good work taking place across the university and across the different campuses. If I give you a couple examples, I suppose, of things that I've seen. Certainly the creation of BAME advocates, so students who have working across the different campuses, they're supporting other students, they're creating blogs, they're putting on events, inviting speakers in. They're actually helping to change the curriculum as well. So they're advising on the curriculum and what we're doing to ensure that it's inclusive as well. So I think the BAME advocates is one of the things that was really exciting, and I think it was great to see at the university. There are other things as well in terms of looking at different groups. Social mobility is a huge part of things that are happening as well, and really developing at the university. We have an I Belong club, which is a monthly club which invites speakers, and it's looking at, I suppose, people from non-traditional backgrounds and sort of access to the legal profession and what it's like. And I think that's important in terms of looking at that aspect. We're doing things around well and support for disabled students. So there are lots of different aspects which really attracted me. And I think one of the things that I saw when I looked at ULaw was also about the satisfaction of students as well. It's got one of the high satisfaction rates of students across the higher education sector, which was brilliant. And I can see that some of those activities that were helping to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know personally when I've met, and in fact, a BAME advocate, I think, joined us at a previous Legal Cheek event. It's such an amazing initiative. And the fact that they're actually sort of in paid positions by the University of Law to take this work on. And I think we'd probably be, I know there's been some talk about extending that advocate scheme to other groups of students. Is that right? Disabled students or LGBTQ plus and things.
Yeah. I think particularly we are looking at disabled students at the moment, and utilising that advocate scheme in the same way.
Okay, brilliant. So what's next then? What's on your to-do list for the university? Where would we like to be in terms of ED&I?
Yeah, so I think as I mentioned, I think there's lots of good work that's taking place, particularly within the student space. Part of my role is to bring all of that together and to develop a strategy. So one of my first goals is to develop an EDI strategy for the university. I think it's looking that we're doing with students, but also moving that a step further, and also looking at our staff as well, and the support that we're providing for our staff, and thinking about diversity and inclusion within that space, because there's also a link. We have an incredibly diverse student community, and I want to ensure that the university also reflects that as well in terms of its staffing as well. So I think there's a link there in terms of strategy around representation within the staffing body as well.
Absolutely. I think I'm starting to hear that quite a lot from students and from others about, I think the university has got quite good at monitoring the diversity of its staff and encouraging greater diversity, because we're all really conscious of that sort of role modeling thing that we need to maintain for the legal students who are coming to us. Thank you. So if I just turn our attention away from the university and look externally for a minute, and as I say, I know your background is not as a lawyer, it's from an employability background, but I mean, a fairly easy question, I suppose. Do you think things need to change in the legal profession on this? What do you see when you talk to students or when you look at firms out there?
Yeah, that's not a leading question at all, Morette.
I know, sorry.
Yeah, I think, well, it's quite interesting. I think that's a really interesting question. And if we look at the legal profession, so if we look at the Law Society and look at their data and what they're saying, actually, the legal profession looks quite diverse at the moment. And actually, where the challenges are that we're finding that males are underrepresented and females are overrepresented when we're looking at the working age population. The same with if we look at ethnicity as well. There's a bigger challenge, I think, around disability, and also thinking about social mobility as well, and thinking about socioeconomic background, where there are differences. So when you look at it, and I've seen this within other organizations, if we think about organizations as well as the profession, where on the surface or on the face of it, things look quite diverse and that we're moving in direction and everything's great. But once you sort of dig a bit deeper and look at the detail, then it's probably not as great as it would appear on the surface. So I think obviously there are issues, as we know, at partner level and within senior management level, where there definitely needs to be more diversity and more work that needs to happen within that space. And again, that is similar within the vast majority of organizations as well. So I think there's good work happening, and we're seeing change, and that's evident within the statistics that we see. I would say that it's not evenly spread across different firms and organizations. So we will see within individual firms that diversity may not be as apparent as others. So I think it's looking at it more, I think, at a local level in terms of that diversity and what needs to be done, and certainly at a senior level as well. But it's positive, and I think one of the key things is that there are lots of firms who are engaged and wanting to do work within this space. So I think that's really beneficial and helpful. I would say when I started out looking at diversity and inclusion, working within this space over 20 years ago, there was me knocking on doors and trying to get people to listen to me and to think about it. I think we're in a different space now where it's the other way around. I'm hiding under my table because there are so many people knocking on the doors wanting to engage and do things in this. So I think that's really positive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really true, I think. And yeah, apologies to Patrick that I'm constantly asking him to join conversations and things, because I see that too. People want to talk about this more and more, and they want to perhaps get involved with law schools and think about what they could actually do to improve things. And really fascinating what you say about gender diversity. I think we all see that. I'll ask Maria and Peter in a minute about gender diversity in their recruits. Certainly amongst junior lawyers and new joiners, we see so many women, young women, female students joining, but it's the progression, isn't it, as you say, to partnership and senior management roles that makes a real difference. I suppose, given COVID is kind of hanging over absolutely everything that we're doing at the moment, I just wondered if there was any tie-in with what you do, what you've been doing. Are there any your personal sort of reflections on the COVID experience, and whether you think that's had any impact from a sort of diversity and inclusion perspective?
I think it's absolutely had an impact from a D&I perspective. I think it's sort of shone a light, or it's highlighted the impact on different groups, and making people realize and think more that things do impact differently on specific groups. So I think it's certainly shone a light on that and made people think more in terms of I think sometimes I think that if you do something the same for everyone, then we're treating everyone equally and everything's okay. I think it's showing that that's not the case, and that there will be impact on different groups, and we need to look at that, and we need to consider impact on different groups for a whole range of different things. I think the other thing is that it's moved conversations on at a faster pace than we probably would have seen previously, and thinking particularly in terms of we've been forced to operate in a different space and in a different way, and thinking about hybrid working and the future. I think when I said I went onto campus for the first time earlier this week, it was really empty in all the office blocks and things around me, and I think a lot of the talk is that it's not going to be the same. Not everyone's going to be coming back to work full time, and I think that's going to be really beneficial, looking at how we work in a different space for a whole range of different people. If we think about disability, if we think about caring responsibilities and a whole range of other things, I think from a diversity perspective, it can only be positive in terms of looking at new and different ways. And it's what people have been calling out for quite a long time, and people have said that they don't think it's possible and that it can't be done. But I think that's really helped.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would completely agree. And I know we've sort of had many discussions. We have our sort of bi-weekly updates on the sort of COVID situation, that we've really tried to keep our campuses and our study spaces and things open for students, because as you say, just treating everyone equally is not necessarily enough. some students are not in a position where they have laptops and Wi-Fi access and the ability to work in their own sort of quiet study space at home. So we've sort of thought it was really important to make that space available for students that needed it. And as you say, the pandemic has absolutely not affected all of us equally. So thank you for that. If I could just ask you then for perhaps 1 or 2 key takeaways for our audience, what message would you like them to hear from you about equality, diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, so I think over the years, what I've seen it is that there are lots of people who are interested and committed and doing things within this space. I think in a lot of respects we're seeing progress, but very slow progress in a lot of areas. And for me, it's about accountability, ownership, and responsibility of this agenda. So I suppose it's about personal accountability, and that everyone has a role to play within this space. And I think particularly those who are decision makers, those who are engaged with recruitment, they have a huge role to play. And for me, it's thinking about what good looks like, and what do we mean by a good lawyer, and who's defining that, and how diverse is that space in terms of people thinking about what a good lawyer should look like. And I think there needs to be more conversations and more open conversations about things. I'll finish with, I think Grayson Perry for me sort of sums it up really well. He talks about default man, and he defines it as someone who sort of in terms of the person who's the decision maker and leading across the professions, and describes them as a sort of white, middle-aged, middle-class, heterosexual, able-bodied man, in effect, and saying that these are the people who are actually making the decisions for the rest of society and how we change and how we move forward. So if it's similar within the legal profession, then obviously we know of talk about people recruiting in their own image. We're not going to see a great deal of change. So we need to open up that conversation about who's involved, who's making the decisions, and how we're defining things.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm going to pause our conversation, if I may, at that point and switch to my other 2 guests. But I can see a couple of questions. I can see a discussion raging in the chat box about use of pronouns, which perhaps we'll come back to later on. But I'd like to introduce my second guest, and that is Maria. Maria Kell is, as I said, a professional support lawyer, and let me get your title right. You are the Legal New Talent Manager for the BBC. Hello, and thank you so much for being here this morning. Could you just tell us a little bit about your role at the BBC and what it is you do?
Yes, of course. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so I have a kind of hybrid role, really. So I was employed as a professional support lawyer, but I would say, and that brings with it the usual professional support functions, which mirrors my background to a large extent. But the bigger part of my job is actually being responsible for all the recruitment and all the line management and all the support of new talent, which comes into the BBC in the BBC legal team. So the BBC legal function is quite complicated. We have an in-house law team called BBC Legal, and we also have lawyers in other parts of the organisation, particularly in commercial rights and in BBC Studios, the commercial arm of the BBC. But the new talent function is centralised in BBC Legal. So it's my responsibility, really. So I decide which schemes we're going to run, how we're going to find people, and look after them and shape and develop their legal careers all the way through, really, from the day that we say, yes, please come and work for us.
I can't help thinking the idea of training at the BBC is very, very exciting. I'm sure I would have applied for a training contract or an apprenticeship at the BBC had I had the chance. But yeah, that's my career history. So I know from previous conversations that your early talent strategy has changed a lot in recent years from what was a fairly traditional training contract approach. Is that right?
Yes, no, actually, it might be helpful if I give you a very potted history. So back in 2014, we started our first legal apprenticeship. So that was quite early. That was a paralegal level 3 apprenticeship open to school leavers with A levels or equivalent. So we had a few people come through that scheme, and when they finished, they had to transfer into a level 6 apprenticeship, which takes you up to Chartered Legal Exec level. And that's now finished, and we're utterly thrilled that we've put in place a third apprenticeship for the people who remain, and that's to transfer between level 6 Chartered Legal Exec to become solicitors under a level 7 apprenticeship. So that's a kind of, this is brand new, and this has only been available since the SQE came into force, into effect. So that's one thing that's happened. We had another batch of level 3s come in, I think it was 2014, so 2016. And by the time they'd finished their level 3, they were able to go directly onto a level 7 apprenticeship. So they didn't need to go through the Chartered Legal Exec route at all, and they are now on track to become solicitors, training with the University of Law. And then the final piece of the puzzle was, alongside those apprentices over those years, we've always had trainees, but only 4 spots, or sometimes 5, every 2 years. But we're now able to change our training contract to a graduate level 7 apprenticeship, and which is fantastic because it means we can offer greater access, because we can pay for the SQE via the apprenticeship levy, whereas previously, because we're publicly funded, we were unable to pay for the LPC, which did reduce our pool of candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, is it right, you're just looking for your first batch of graduate
Yes,
apprentices?
so I hope some of the people on this call have applied to us. We opened a competition on the 1st of April. We closed it on the 9th of May. So at the moment we are going through looking for a shortlist. We've had an overwhelming response. It's been fantastic. And, you know, it will roll through, and we look forward to welcoming our first graduate apprentices in January or February next year. And they will then go on block release to the University of Law to do as much of the SQE as they can, and then start in the business, doing their qualifying work experience and taking SQE too. Yeah,
so the levy really has enabled you to sort of double your intake of new lawyers.
That's absolutely right. So I don't know if anybody knows, but the BBC celebrates its centenary next year in 2022. So all areas of the BBC. And so that meant that legal could have some more. And because we can also attract a slightly wider audience with the levy support, we are now moving to a model of 4 spaces every year. So we'll have a cohort, like you would in a law firm, of first-year apprentices and second-year apprentices, which would be fantastic.
No, absolutely. As I say, I can see that's going to be a hugely popular scheme. What sort of things do you think, what sort of skills and attributes are you looking for in a BBC solicitor apprentice, would you say?
Not hugely different from
asking for a friend, obviously.
From anyone else. I mean, we need clear, critical thinkers. We need people who are flexible, because what you see on the news is often what comes into the BBC legal team that day. It's quite crisis-driven, is perhaps putting it a bit negatively, but event-driven, or some of our work is. We need people with an interest in current affairs, an understanding of how media works, because media is both editorial, but it's also a business. And we also need a real understanding of the BBC's unique position as the world's leading public service broadcaster, and the BBC values of trust and transparency. And so we look for people that embody all of those things, but it's really important that we have a diverse mix of people with different perspectives as well, because the BBC serves everybody, so their lawyers have to be everybody too.
Yes, absolutely. And have you noticed the gender split that Patrick mentioned? I bet many of your trainees and apprentices are women. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, I certainly endorse the fact that we get a higher proportion of women through the door. And it depends. I mean, ideally we'd like a 50-50 gender balance. It may be slightly skewed towards women, but we try not to be.
I mean, I think we see that in students at the university. Law is very popular with female students.
It's the organisation skills, I like to
think. Okay, I'll take your word for that. So I wanted to ask you, because we were talking the other day about the experience of working for the BBC during a lockdown, during a pandemic. How have your trainees and apprentices handled it the past year?
Well, they've handled it with aplomb, as they do everything. That's the first thing to say. I think the study part of what they do, so the apprentices we have at the moment are on the 1 day a week release scheme. So most of their learning is online. So I don't think that's been hugely affected. And there's been a great deal of support. There have been skills, been mental health support, all sorts of sessions and things to help them. So the study side of things has been fine. And obviously, I think it's the work side of the apprenticeship, which is the bulk of it, of course, which has been harder. There's no osmosis because they're not in the workplace, it goes without saying. And sometimes I think it's hard to know what you don't know when you're not in the office. And to think that you need to make decisions, which perhaps in the office where you're surrounded by people with more experience, that you'd know that you're there to learn rather than to do. So I think that can be quite difficult. But I mean, they've all done absolutely brilliantly. And of course, the other factor is not everybody has adequate or, you know, a good working environment at home. That goes without saying. The more junior you are, the more difficult that's likely to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you planning for their return to the office?
So we are hoping to have our trainees and apprentices in 4 days a week, which for the apprentices actually isn't a change because they had the 1 day a week study day, which they generally chose to spend at home anyway. For the trainees, that is a day at home, which will be a Friday. And then the other thing we are looking at is if the other lawyers are in less, we might give 2 teams to a trainee or an apprentice so that on a Monday, Tuesday, they've got team A to sit with and learn with, and on a Wednesday, Thursday, they've got team B to sit with and learn with. But those plans are still in development at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that to me the other day about this 2-team approach. I thought it was fascinating because I haven't heard anyone else mentioning it, but it'll be really interesting to see how they get on with the 2-team approach. We
need to suck it and see. And I think we're still allocating a seat for a given period of time, but we might have a kind of a reserve position. So you'd still primarily be doing work for team A, but you'd also be learning from team B. I think we'll probably have to do it that way if that's how the osmosis will work in future. It will be different and we will have to see how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know from talking to people at various law firms and legal employers, the sort of learning by osmosis is one of the most challenging things. You know, I think if you've been through that process, you know how important it was to observe, be part of meetings, overhear other people's conversations. And it is so challenging to try and replicate that in a remote world. So yeah, it sounds like a really interesting pilot.
I think it's quite difficult for juniors to speak up in Zoom calls as well. It's harder than it is in person.
Yeah,
because it's more difficult to pick up on cues and, you know, to take your place in the room. And obviously we're trying, as you are too, we're trying to help with training on skilling people to do that.
Just as you say that reminds me that there is a poll running in this room. If you're on the right hand side of your screen next to the chat, if you click on polls, there is a poll about, apart from the SQE, apart from that huge thing, what is your priority at the moment? And the reason I mention it now is I can see amongst those who have already voted, I don't want to influence anyone's vote. Perhaps I'll just give you a few seconds to click it in case I end up skewing the result. But overwhelmingly, it does seem that integrating working from home with back to the office is your priority at the moment, which I can completely understand. Other options being taking steps to mitigate unconscious bias during the training and recruitment process. Patrick might come back to you on that if we have time at the end. And then thirdly, upskilling trainees to use technology better. And I'm sure that is a priority, is something that all firms want to do, but perhaps is less important at the moment than the immediate concern, which is the return to the office. So yeah, no, so it's very interesting to hear what you're saying, Maria, about your plans. And I suppose none of us know at the moment, do we, whether is this the new normal? Is this how it's going to be going forwards? Or perhaps, you know, by the end of the year, will they be looking to come back into the office full time? Although I guess for apprentices, as you say, they're always going to have this hybrid experience. So if I could just return to the apprenticeships for a moment, you sound like a complete advocate of them. Perhaps surprised that more people haven't adopted it. What would you say about that?
Yes, I am quite surprised. because it'd be interesting to see what Peter has to say, because his take on it is entirely different. But for us, you know, we pay the apprenticeship levy. If we can use some of that to support people to become lawyers, and then that's a good thing that we can do. So it really is a no-brainer for us. But that's, you know, coming at it from a position where we can't spend public funds training people with postgraduate legal education. So you know, I wanted to do this about 3 years ago, to be honest, and you know, there've been a few setbacks with the introduction of the SQE, but I'm really thrilled that we've got off the blocks almost as quickly as we can, really. And prepared to be flexible. You know, this is new. It should be good, but let's see if it is, and you know, if it's not quite right, then we will change things as we go along. But I'm quite convinced it's the right direction of travel. There's no doubt about that.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, and from talking to legal employers, there does seem to be this clear split. In-house legal functions, local government, central government, really on board with this and exploiting it to the maximum. Whereas I think it's fair to say that private practice law firms are still being a little bit more cautious about it. But perhaps I'll ask Peter about that. So thank you very much, Maria. I'd just like to introduce Peter, who's been sitting very quietly and patiently waiting for me. Hello, good to see you. Do you want to just introduce yourself to the audience and explain your role at CMS?
Yep, hi, my name's Peter Arnold. So as Marek said earlier, I'm the Early Talent Development Manager at CMS. And what that really means is once we have recruited our trainees, our solicitor apprentices, I will look after them from a development perspective with the ETD team. You know, we work very closely with the University of Law and view it very much as a partnership between us and them around, well, how do we develop our early talent before they join the firm, but also in the case of solicitor apprentices, how do we continually work together and develop throughout? And you know, that's a huge passion, I think, for myself and the team around that partnership and making sure that all of the early talent is being developed in the right way, and it's one of those continual processes that we work on together as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And if I could just start with the point that Maria made about the rise and the growth of graduate entry apprenticeships and things at the BBC, is that a balance that you see changing at CMS? Because you say you've got this wide route of pathways into the profession.
Yeah, I think there's potential too. I mean, as I said, we have solicitor apprentices. We've had those since 2009. In fact, for September, our new ones, we are doubling our numbers of solicitor apprentices. We're going from 11 to 22 because, you know, we can see the massive value that brings, the support that it brings to the legal industry for those that want to be involved in the legal industry as well. You know, we've seen the excellent work that they do. And, you know, we've made that commitment to double it, and we will continue to do that going forward. Obviously, we have our graduate trainee entries as well. As part of the changes, we are looking at, okay, well, how do we support those graduates that want to go down that graduate apprenticeship route as well, if possible. You know, that is something that we're looking at going forward. Obviously, you know, legal executives, how do they qualify through the SQE later on, and paralegals that want to, and all that side of things. And I think within that pathway, it's not just around the apprenticeships and graduate routes. There are all sorts of other ways of helping and develop through this new SQE model that we're beginning to be able to progress through and support as a firm. And, you know, for me, you know, I think that's fantastic because it creates a more diverse talent pool for the firm, which I think is only going to be a good thing for us and the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned paralegals. They are one of the most hotly discussed topics at the moment, and how paralegals and, as you say, chartered legal execs, whether they can or should be requalifying under the SQE. But I think we'll save that discussion for another day. I wanted to ask you about your experience of the past year. So how has your early talent pool coped with COVID?
I think it's fair to say mixed, and I think, you know, part of that is we're all in mixed environments at this moment in time. I think, you know, if we look back to March last year as a firm, we were quite lucky because we do work in a very agile way. You know, we were able to take all our work into our homes with our Surface Pros and pick up from day one. It was fantastic. It was quite seamless. I think what you find as time goes on, there's obviously mental well-being that comes into play, of isolation and things like that. And a lot of our early talent have maybe gone home to be with family, and, you know, fantastic. We're very supportive of that. I think from a work context around it, it's been really interesting because feedback we've had from our trainees and solicitor apprentices has been that they are getting more high-level work and they're getting more stuck in as a result of it. And, you know, part of that is the work that we've done as a team with our supervisors around, well, how do you create that learning environment in a virtual way? So we rolled out a program based around conscious learning and personal development to really put that at the forefront of both our early talent and our supervisors, so that they're working together in collaboration around, well, how do they continue to learn during this time? They've learned new skills that they wouldn't have learned in the office, and, you know, I think that has been a real value for them. And I think, you know, going forward, it's how do you retain that? How do you retain those extra pieces of learning that they're doing with that in office environment as well, and having that right level of combination for them from a learning perspective? I think it's been, you know, useful from delivering sessions. You've been able to deliver to more people. At times we've found, you know, we run supervisor forums every few months around, well, actually what's going on for them, how are they working with the early talent, what challenges are they facing, how do we support that? We've found that those sorts of sessions are more widely attended as a result of this, and you are able to reach in a different way. Obviously, we have, you know, 9 offices across the country that have got early talent within them, and, you know, you can't bring them all together in one place at one time. It's not possible, but this has meant that we're able to do that, which is fantastic.
So when they do start coming back into the office, how are you thinking of handling their return to the workplace? What did you think of Maria's plan at the BBC for their Team A and Team B?
I think that's interesting because we do that with some of our offices, with some of our early talent. They do work across 2 practice groups, and it works. It works really well. Obviously, they have to have supervisors in both, and, you know, they have to talk to each other. But, you know, we've been able to implement that. So I think, you know, it is a really, really good thing and a good idea to do. I think, you know, we've not set what we're going to be doing going forward, but, you know, my gut feeling is there will be an element of flexibility. I think for early talent, there is a huge push on that. You know, you need to learn by osmosis. Being in the office is, you know, an important part of that. So, you know, you'd be looking at probably 4 days in the office as part of that. You know, you would have shared supervisors, which we do anyway. The majority of our early talent have more than one supervisor to help give a breadth of experience, a breadth of knowledge, breadth of different clients that they get involved with. So we would continue along. that sort of path and ensure that they are working together as well. But it's part of that collaboration, and how does it work within the firm, in the departments as well.
No, it's interesting what you said about the fact that, you know, engagement with training and things has actually potentially been better, or has been better during this time. And as you say, with regional spread of offices, it is easier to connect with them all in this virtual world. And I said we weren't going to talk about the SQE, we're not. But of course, new courses do mean new options and new opportunities. Do you think is blended learning something that you think you might take forward into your SQE programs, or do you think students still really value that sort of face-to-face experience whilst studying?
I think definitely we will. I think it's important, because it's got to work for everyone's learning styles. And you know, we can't all go down one route. We don't do that in the workplace. Part of the work with the University of Law and the study courses, when we look at things like the SQE, even the LPC, part of it is preparing you for practice. And that's a huge important part of it. So, you know, we deliver sessions to our current students. Obviously, at the moment, they are virtually. We will be delivering some that will be via an e-learning module to support them. And I think that blended approach is really important for them, to really not even go down just one route. I mean, the huge thing for us is around, well, how do our early talent begin to think differently around problems? How do they problem solve? And doing all of their learning in one way isn't going to support that. I think, you know, they need to be able to see all the options and all the different ways of learning in order to, you know, not go down that tried and tested route that we tend to do. And, you know, we're looking at how do you create an environment for them to experiment and fail at times. And, you know, part of that is within their courses and learning and that side of things. But another part of it is on the job, and giving them that opportunity and the right supervision and support that actually they can look at problems in a different way and experiment. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But giving them the opportunity to really have that empowerment to do it is hugely important. And that comes right back to the study courses and the SQE and what we do within that to support it right from day one.
Okay. Yeah, no, agreed completely. So thank you so much, Peter. I'm just going to pause, if I may, because I can see the questions are building up in the chat box on the side, and we only have a few minutes. So I'm going to just select a few. We may not have time to get through all of them, but I will do my best. First of all, there's one from Maria, which is a really interesting question about what is your reasoning for offering your chartered legal execs a further apprenticeship to convert to a solicitor? What's the benefit of a solicitor over Silex for the BBC? I suspect a lot of people in the room have this experience with paralegals and legal execs in the team. What would you say, Maria, to that?
There's more legal education involved in becoming a solicitor. So they have to take more heads of substantive law to reach the equivalent of what they would have studied in a law degree or a GDL. So that's point one. It's more actual learning. I'm talking of the basics: contract or equity, land or criminal, you know, the usual. And then the other thing that's really driving it is what they really want. And we've known them a long time. They've worked immensely hard, and we are supporting them to give them what they want.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. There's a retention thing, isn't there? Because if you don't give them that opportunity, you may leave them. And if you've invested in them so far and you want them to stay,
they really want it, and now we can do it. So the two things match.
Win-win.
Yeah,
okay.
win-win.
Thank you. There's a question around diversity of apprenticeships intake, which I can certainly say from the university point of view, our apprenticeship intake is incredibly diverse. Gender, ethnicity, social mobility. I think it is, of all our programs, it's probably one of the widest spread of diversity of all our programs. And as a program which certainly has the ability to make real changes to people's lives from a social mobility perspective, I think it's absolutely unbeatable, the full apprenticeship program. Maria, you're popular. How is the training different in the new apprenticeship compared to training contracts from before?
The answer to that is not terribly at the moment. So we are still intending to offer more or less 4 6-month seats, just as we did to trainees. We do offer mini placements as well. So sometimes where somebody develops an interest as they continue through the contract or the apprenticeship, we can accommodate extra things as they go along. And I don't know the answer to that because I haven't done it yet. So I hope I can give a clearer answer once we have tried it, but we will be following the same basic layout of 4 diverse areas of law to see what people are good at and, you know, what works for them.
And then, thank you. Having said that, we weren't really talking about the SQE. I see a couple of questions about the SQE, more technical side of it, which I'm tempted to say, come and find me in the ULaw booth later, and I will happily answer them. But there is one about timing, about since the first set of exams this autumn, do you think that refraining from taking the exams for a year is a safer option? So I'm just going to ask Peter, maybe, are you switching to the SQE for this November 2021?
No, we're switching to 2022. We're going to be doing the SQE, and you know, as you know, it is really going to be around that partnership and working together, and how do we bespoke elements of that.
Navigate the change.
Well, yeah, and that's the huge thing. But we've already started that process and looking at, okay, how do we navigate it in the right way?
Absolutely. I think I can speak for many in this audience when I say I don't think many firms, other than those who are using the solicitor apprenticeship, are actually looking at going in for the SQE this autumn. Most people are a little bit more reluctant than that and want to hang back and see how the first year goes. But yeah, I'm very happy to chat about the SQE in more specificity in the booth. Patrick, I was just going to mention you, there was a little debate raging earlier on in the chat box about the use of pronouns, and you came on this morning and I thought, oh, Patrick's got his pronouns. I should have done mine. Any thoughts about use of them? Is it would you encourage everyone to start using their pronouns? What's the rationale? Oh, we can't hear you, Patrick. I think you're on mute. Notice nobody else had them on this morning. No, we can't hear you, Patrick. Try again. No.
Can you hear me, Morette?
Shame. I can hear you. Yes, it's just Patrick. We've lost some sort. Perhaps I could ask you to maybe type it in the chat box, Patrick, your thoughts on using pronouns. Thank you very much. Other questions for my panel? Let me just have a little look. Question about training contract. How, for the new SQE, how can an international student apply for possible legal experience and or for SQE apprenticeships? Well, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but I think I would say if you're looking for qualifying work experience, then the position of an international student is probably no different to any other. And I'm sure both BBC and CMS have probably had many international students over the years. If you're looking for an apprenticeship, the rules there are slightly different, aren't they? Because you have to be eligible, you have to be resident. I think it's quite specific to make use of the levy. You have to be resident actually in England with the right to work in that country. So it is going to depend on what your nationality is, where you are ordinarily resident, and whether you are eligible for work in England. And I talk to a lot of firms, of whom I'm sure there are many represented here today, such as CMS, who have offices around the whole of the UK and are slightly thwarted by the fact that levy funds can currently only be spent in England and are not available, for example, for trainees. And someone's put England or Wales. I think it is England, because I have had discussions with firms with offices in Cardiff, and you can't even spend your levy in Cardiff because I think the levy is part of a devolved administration. So different rules apply for different parts of the UK. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Peter or Maria, but I'm pretty sure that is the case.
And I mean, we're looking at solicitor apprentices in Scotland as well at the moment, and how do we start that side of things as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is different rules for those different jurisdictions. Thank you. I'm just taking a quick look in on the poll, but it's there we are. It seems to have disappeared from me. I suspect that's because it's 10 o'clock. So I'm just going to thank all of my speakers. Did anyone have any final words that they wanted to share? Any final thoughts, things we haven't covered? No? Okay. Then I think we are all done. So thank you ever so much for joining me. I'm sorry we couldn't hear you right at the end there, Patrick, but I'm sure we can catch up with someone who wants to carry on the discussion about use of pronouns. But thank you, Maria and Peter. I know how busy you are. We really appreciate you giving up your time. And I'm going to hand back to the Legal Cheek team. Aisha, are you there?
Our pleasure.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you.
I am, Morette. Thanks very much for chairing that brilliant session. So delegates, it's time to network now. Stretch those legs. We're going to head to the expo for this first session. You've got just under 20 minutes to network before we reconvene here in sessions for a fireside chat, I think, with trainees. So why not grab a coffee? Go ahead and browse the various booths in the expo. You'll be able to video chat, sort of catch up with colleagues. Just make sure that you switch your audio and camera on. So speakers, I'm going to ask you all to now join me as we make our way into the expo. And we will return here in sessions at 20 past 10 for session 2. So we'll see you all over in the expo now.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.